This is the seventh part of a presentation on understanding Islam, unpacking the Shahada. We're looking now at the issue of Islamization. Islamization is a long-term, theologically determined, deliberate and strategic transformative process whose end goal is the establishment of Islam, that is of sharia law and Muslim rule in a country, as the dominant political, legal, religious and social system in that nation. A long-term, theologically determined, deliberate and strategic transformative process. There is a continuation in the process of Islam, the process of calling people to Islam, of da'wah, from the early stages which involve dialogue, invitation, perhaps occupying and transforming public institutions, persuading, winning people's hearts, if necessary, corruption and deception, jihad of ideas and finances, the promotion of sharia finance and other sharia systems into a society. In the later stages of Islam, there could be more direct use of intimidation, applying available power, using violence and even military jihad, and that is happening in places in Egypt, in Syria, in parts of Nigeria. There's a tradition in Islam that you should use the highest available level of force available to you to implement Islam. So if something is bad and all you can do is think against it, you should think against it and hate it in your heart. And if you can speak against it, you should speak against it. And if you can use your hand, you should use your hand. So if you've got a range of strategies, violence, speech, and just thought or prayer, if you like, you have to use the most violent one that you can have. Now, that grid means that Muslim communities can change very significantly in how they'll progress their case, depending on the degree of power they have and the degree of influence they have. And it's a very deeply understood principle in Islam. And Islamization can be a long process that can have many different phases. There are some groups like the Muslim Brotherhood that have worked this out, and they have a doctrine of the phases of da'wah. So this is a proclamation of Islam, and they deliberately have different stages. Jihad towards the end, earlier on focus on teaching children and helping the poor. And it's very kind of well worked out on their part. The results of Islamization vary from country to country. So Saudi Arabia is very Islamized. Iran not as Islamized, because Persian culture has a number of resistance points to strict Islam. For example, Persians love singing and they love music, and they do sing. But it's illegal to sing and to do music in Islam. Muhammad hated music. And so Persian culture, even though the government is a radical Islamic government and they ban music, Persians resist this. They don't like it. And Turkey would be a bit similar. Indonesia, only very superficially Islamized in many ways. Islam was not brought in from outside. It was established through conversion of sultans, of leaders, and then spread internally by internal conquest, but it's always been quite syncretistic. Sometimes people say, look, isn't Indonesia a great example that Islam is consistent with democracy, or it's consistent with modern principles? Well, the problem is this is not a very Islamicized society. It's superficially Islamized. And Pakistan, as a former Hindu society, is much more Islamized than Indonesia. Great Britain, somewhat Islamicized. You know, there are significant concessions established whereby for example, the sharia courts, where Muslim women are increasingly being coerced to have their divorces and family issues addressed there. Canada, far less. You said no to sharia courts a few years ago when Muslim women complained about it, but the British have not resisted that. And so countries in the West vary in the degree to which they've accepted Islamic freedom of speech, restrictions or concessions to family law, sharia finance, halal food. These things vary from place to place. So it's a continuum. And the end station, if you want to know what Sharia law looks like in its full application, go to Saudi Arabia and you'll get the full deal. The Muslim Brotherhood in North America have a long-term strategic goal for the conversion and Islamization of America. And the FBI found a strategic document. It was published in connection with the Holy Land Foundation trial. It dated from the 22nd of May 1991. It's called an explanatory memorandum on the general strategic goal for the group, the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. The goal is to establish Islam, settle it, as it says, as the dominant way of life. The ultimate goal, it says, is to establish the caliphate, a transcontinental empire. The process of settlement, it says, is a civilizational jihadist process with all that the word means. The Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands, that is, will get the Americans to destroy their own way of life, and the hands of the believers. Muslims will also actively work against American culture and civilization so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. He cites that verse, they cite that verse that I gave you in an earlier part. It is the Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and to work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. So that's a strategic document and explains that the establishment of Islamic organizations and of mosques and other things are all devoted to this purpose of drawing the Muslim community together towards to work towards this goal. This is an article that was written in 1980, already a long time ago now, in the context of Europe, published by the Islamic Council of Europe in London. It's speaking about the process of ideological preparation. If successful, the Islamic community, such a community, would grow constantly in influence and numbers as to become a majority community in the course of time. To become a successful community should be the aim of every Muslim minority. This is an ideological necessity, that is, the doctrine of Islam demands it, without which the entire presence of the minority would be Islamically unacceptable. In Islamic law, a Muslim is not meant to live in a non-Muslim country for more than 3 nights at a time. So the presence of Muslims in Canada is illegal. However, what he's saying is that it's permitted doctrinally if they're working towards establishing Islam as the dominant religion in the country. That's the necessity that allows the forbidden to be permitted. It's forbidden to be here, but if you have the goal of taking over and working towards it, that justifies you living here, even though you shouldn't be here. There's a duty called the duty to emigrate, which Muslims have, the duty to go and live where Islam is a dominant community. He goes on to write, once the community is well organized, its leaders should strive to seek recognition of Muslims as a religious community, having its own characteristics by the authorities, so concessions to Islamic law, concessions to Islamic dress, and so on. Once recognized, the community should continue to request the same rights the other religious communities enjoy in the country. Equally, eventually, the community may seek to gain political rights as a constituent community of the nation, so there's an actual distinct political entity. Once these rights are obtained, then the community should seek to generalize its characteristics to the entire nation. That means that Islam would become the character of the whole nation. So if there are groups that have rights here, like Native Indians or Christian groups or whatever, the Muslim group should say, treat us with equality, but when we have that equality, and then we can get a majority, we will become dominant. So no more equality then we will impose our values on the rest of the community. So there's a shifting kind of set of arguments, but the goal is the same in the end. Here is a summary of points made by an Australian teacher. He was from South Africa, Zachariah Matthews, who's very well known for work amongst youth in Australia, and he gave a lecture in 2001 in Sydney. And he was called a leading moderate by the Australian newspaper in 2005. So this lecture said that in the phases of da'wah, of proclaiming, establishing Islam, Muslims should reform the self, so you work at becoming more religious personally, work together. Islam calls for organized and collective work. Notice the emphasis in the other sources as well. The Muslim community should work together. Instruct and guide society. Remember, we are the ones who command what's right and wrong. Establish local sovereignty, territory over which Muslims could have political sovereignty. So establish an area in a city where Muslims are dominant. Patience is required. This is a very long process. It doesn't have to happen overnight. He also said deception is necessary, again based on the example of Muhammad, and secrets should be hidden. He said that followers, Muslims, should be informed only on a need-to-know basis. So even the Muslims should only tell their followers what's going to happen next when the time comes. It doesn't need to be made obvious in advance that we're going to be fighting in a jihad, for example, or whatever the strategies. At each stage, the appropriate strategies will be revealed. Now, I just want to summarize or conclude this by pointing out that religions are not all the same. It's a widely held view in secular Western society that religions are all the same. All paths lead to the same mountain. people are all basically decent and religions basically all teach the same values. This is not true. It's just not true. Islam is a program of submission to the example of Muhammad. Surah 33:36, it becomes not a believing man or a believing woman when Allah and his messenger have decided an affair that they should after that claim any say in their affair. They have no right to speak about the situation once Muhammad has spoken. And whoever is rebellious to Allah and his messenger, he goes astray in error manifest. Now every true Christian wants to be like Jesus, take up my cross and follow me, he said. And every true Muslim wants to follow Muhammad's example. That's the Sunnah. In the Messenger of Allah you have a good example, although they differ in how they would apply that. But the key question is, who will we follow? Christians don't seek to follow Jesus' customs that were part of his cultural identity. The Gospel writers don't really tell us how Jesus ate his eggs or whether he had a beard or how he used to sleep and so on, what colour shoes he liked, how he went to the toilet. But Muslims are instructed to follow these examples down to the last detail. And so for many, Muslims following in the footsteps of Muhammad means living the life of a 7th century Arab. It's a very all-inclusive thing. And that's a challenge when people leave Islam, because sometimes they feel a bit lost because they don't have the instructions, they don't know how to follow the way of Jesus. The key question for us is, who are we following? And who will our nation follow? And for Muslims too that are leaving Islam, are you willing to follow Jesus and make him your example and renounce and make a break with the example of Muhammad? That's the end of that presentation.